Okay, welcome everybody, and Brad and Maggie do know that we're now maybe just starting our 12th month of dismantling racism classes. We started Juneteenth last year, spurred by the killing of all too many Black men and women. But I've been looking forward to this day for 5 weeks since I spoke with Maggie to see if she would be willing to be part of our class, this one course on investments, socially responsible investments. And I was thrilled to see that the Presbyterian Church uses faith-based investing to be basically synonymous with socially responsible. And I certainly, faith-based certainly speaks more to me than socially conscious investing. I was an advisor for 30 years, and I did not place a single client in a single socially responsible investment. Now, that was 8 years ago to 38 years ago, and I feel differently now as a result of our classes, really, that the environment plays a big role in how people of color have quality of life or don't. So now I'm very open to this avenue of investing, not only as an individual investor, but also for our church and our investment committee. So you two are going to be valuable spurs to push us along even further in this quest to do right, do good, and also receive adequate returns. That's a very good trade-off, to get adequate returns to good returns while doing good things for our Lord. So I think it's terrific. And I'll tell you who else is terrific is Gail. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph, and I'm not saying that she necessarily authored it, but it speaks to me, and I hope it speaks to you. Faith-based and socially responsible investment allow us to make decisions on how we manage our financial assets in a way that directly aligns with our values and helps promote the goals we have for a more just society. Using proven investment strategies, we can live out our faithful stewardship while growing and promoting God's work in the world. Worthy causes all. So our guests are Maggie Harmon and Brad Masters, and they're going to lead us in a conversation about faith-based investing. Maggie, I think, will begin with basic philosophy of this approach to investing, help us understand how the church has addressed this for years, and just general principles of including this in our decision making and investing. And Brad, I think, will get us to more particular investment approaches. For this class, Brad, I was just very happy to learn from Maggie that the trust company has a new investment. I'll call it a new investment. I'm not sure it's an investment as such. You can clear that up. That specifically companies, corporations, stocks that specifically support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if that's not the right fit for this class, I don't know what it is. It is the right fit. So without further ado, Maggie, why don't you lead us off?
Dennis, I want to make one correction. Those wonderful words were not mine. They were Maggie's or Brad's or somebody's, but I thought they were wonderful. So I get credit for using them. How's that?
Yes, that's what I tried to point out, actually, but yes. Always the humble servant.
Well, Dennis, thank you. And I'm so glad to be with you all today and be able to have this conversation. As Dennis said, I'm going to speak sort of to the philosophy, and I'm going to let Brad talk about technical things and give some examples of the actual practical look of what socially responsible investing might be. And I use the phrase socially responsible investing, faith-based investing, and biblically focused investing. I use those interchangeably. They're not everyone understands them to be interchangeable, but for our purposes of conversation, I use them to say we're investing our assets, we're investing our time, we're investing our energy as human beings in a way that we feel like is consistent and reflective of the values that we have. So I know some of you have been in some of my other classes on legacy or culture of generosity, and I spend a lot of time talking about values and value identification, understanding what matters to you, why it matters to you, and then how you can express that in the world, not just one day a week for a few hours a week, but in everything we do, right? Who can we be? How can we be with everything we're being, right? So that's how I'm talking about it, and that's the phrasing I'm using, but I'm not married to that. So I'm going to share my screen if I can. Go. Hopefully you're all seeing a screen that says socially responsible investing. Great. And I'm going to really focus a lot on where this comes from scripturally, at least where I think it comes from. And you know, if you've been in workshops with me also, you know that I always invite you to disagree with me and to have conversations. So we will have time for question and answer after, but if you have questions while I'm talking, please just unmute and go for it. So I like to start from the simple understanding that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. And I have love in it when I was writing this. I think that that's a really good Freudian slip, because I was typing and I was thinking about my values, and I had just been in a meditation, a gratitude meditation. And so I'm glad I made that mistake. But how do we love the world that we're in? And how do we express that love, right? So I know some of you have seen me do this before, but I always want to start with the principle of stewardship. What is stewardship? It is not writing a check once a year or sending in our pledge card. It's the responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. Or if you don't like that one, the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care, right? So what has been entrusted to us as people of faith, and do we consider that worth taking care of? And that's, you know, that's a little bit of a rhetorical statement, because if you're a person of faith, then my challenge to you always is understanding that all of this has been given to us by God, that we are in an integrated relationship all the time, every day, in building that expression of who we are with God. And that means certainly shouldn't we value what these things are that are in front of us, right? That's what it means to be a steward, is that balance of gratitude and awareness. Philanthropy is different than stewardship, right? Philanthropy is a different concept. And I really like this definition. Of course, we know that philanthropy actually means the love of man, is the Latin, but functionally it means goodwill to fellow members of the human race. And this sounds to me a lot like what we understand over and over is love your neighbor as yourself, right? What does it mean to engage with goodwill toward other members of the human race? Doesn't that mean at a very basic level, caring for them in the same way that we want to be cared for, and in the same way that we care for ourselves? I guess now about 8 weeks ago, with one of my colleagues, I did a workshop on leadership and self-care. And we really focus sometimes on the fact that we don't do good self-care. And if we don't do good self-care, we have a broken judgment of what care of others should look like. So we do have to think about what it means to love ourselves, and then we have to expand that understanding to what it means to love others, and what God is asking us to do in terms of being engaged in loving our neighbor and in sharing that goodwill with them. I also like to think of philanthropy, and this was a little in the introduction, as the tangible expression of our values and beliefs, right? How do I love you all? How do I express that love to you? Has to be an expression of what I think is important. And this seems like a silly question, of course. What does it mean to invest? But when I'm trying to wrap my head around a concept, I always go back and start with definitions. And part of this is probably because I'm trained as an attorney. And so if I'm stuck on something, I always go back to the beginning and say, well, what is this? And then how do I work with it from there? So I looked this up and I said, well, what is it to invest? And the answer, the definition is to make use of for future benefits or advantages. So it's not necessarily about getting the biggest return on something, but conceptually thinking about our investment of really anything, of making sure that we're using something in a way that provides for a future benefit or an advantage. And I thought that was really interesting in thinking about not only how I use my time, but how I use my money, how I use the physical resources around me. Am I using these things in a way that are preserving, that are caring, that can be shared in some way, or learned in some way, or taught in some way with people in the future? And so all of this is to think about what it means to be a responsible investor, a socially responsible investor, a faithfully responsible investor, in thinking about, are we doing things that are for right now, or are we doing things that are going to have an impact, a positive impact on people in the future in a way that is loving? So I think of socially responsible investment as the expressive, active caring. What I put here was expressively, actively caring for something, right? Using my resources to express how it is that I care about something in the world. I'm going to say something controversial right now, but it's an example that I think is useful for, at least for myself. So several years ago, and I don't know if this is still true, Walmart got dinged for paying employees so low that they actually couldn't afford to have housing and to pay for food. And so they were they were doing this really wonderful thing. And I say that, sarcastically, they were bringing in food banks to the employee break room to provide food boxes for employees to take home, because employees weren't making enough money working full time to actually buy food, right? I had a hard time with that. I wasn't a big Walmart shopper before, but when I read that, I said no, because that is not a value that I hold, that someone should work a full week and not be able to provide food for their family. And I don't think you get off the hook by then saying, well, here's a food bank to take care of you. So when we talk about expressively, actively caring, for me, that was saying, I'm going to take my dollars somewhere else. And I may continue to give to the food bank, which I do, but I'm not going to give my dollars to this company, right? So when we think about socially responsible investment, it's not just our large dollar investments, it's also what are we doing as individuals? And I think about this, I was looking at scripture, and it's certainly easy to go to the parable of the talents in Matthew, right? And to say, well, this is God telling us what we're supposed to do with the gifts that we've been given. And I think that is a really good scriptural explanation of how we're supposed to use the gifts God gives us. But in terms of investment and example, I really like to focus on Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to God in heaven. Part of what we're doing when we make a choice to put our dollars somewhere that is consistent with our values is showing other people how to do that. And then when we get those returns, being able to put those returns back into something that's also expressive of our values, we are not just having the impact, but we're being an example and a light to the world. And that is really what God calls us to be doing when we're called to follow Christ. Put away your old life and follow me. Come with me and be an example to the world. And then the last piece I want to talk about before I turn it over to Brad to get practical is this idea of how we align faith and function. Brad and I were actually talking earlier, and I said, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be able to work with the trust company and what they do, and how absolutely brilliant they are in their investment, because you don't have to compromise, right? You don't have to say, well, we're not going to get great returns, but we're doing it with the church. Like the way they have looked at and do look at investment has opened up so many opportunities for truly aligning our faith with the function that we need to then be able to be good stewards. And here's where we can think about the parable of the talents, wisely using the resources we've been given, growing those resources in a way that's still faithful. And I want to leave you with this before I give it over to Brad. We sometimes, I think, overcomplicate things and really want to figure out, can the means change if the ends end up okay? Do the ends justify us not being exactly what, we would want to be like all the time? And I would say, I don't think so. I think the means are who we are as people of faith, right? That it's the function of what we do. And God has made it fairly easy for us to understand what we're supposed to do. Now, it's not always easy to do it, but when we're asked, what is it that we're supposed to be doing? Are we doing it right? We have a lot of different ways of saying, what's the litmus test? And this, of course, from Micah, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself and before God on high? He has told you, O mortal, O human being, just us on this earth, what is good and what is required of us: to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. And so in everything that we're doing, socially responsible investment, faith-based investment becomes a question of, are we investing in a way that's doing justice in the world? Are we loving kindness with our assets? Or loving mercy with our assets? And are we being humble with how we're using these things and gaining from them? And that's really it. And if you can't feel like that's what you're doing, if it gets a little uncomfortable, that's a space to start to grow into and to look at and to say, well, what could I do a little bit differently? So with that, I will give it to Brad, who can talk to you about how we can do this differently, how we can live these principles with our investment.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. I'm gonna need to get that presentation from you, by the way. I'm gonna plagiarize like crazy, right? Really, really well done. So you're right, there's so many elements, I think, about what we're doing here today that are really fun, right? Really relevant, very important, and certainly very personal. And it's just a real treat for me to get to work with people like Maggie. A lot of the folks at the foundation, particularly those of us in the New Covenant Trust Company, and our team, we're a nationally chartered and federally regulated trust company, right? All the designations and educational backgrounds and experience that you would expect to see from investment professionals within our team. And most all of us kind of, we cut our teeth in other places. and are really privileged to be able to bring some of those skills into the life of the church, just as people of faith. In this particular conversation with you all today, I can tell you that we're certainly having more and more of them, and it's really neat to see what's happening out there in the life of the churches. This is all we do, right? Is spend time with local Presbyterian churches, committees, congregations, certainly some mid-councils as well. But this is kind of our little lane, as we call it, is serving Presbyterian churches all over the country. I'll dig into some details here, but on a personal note, I have 4 kids, and one of them is from Haiti that we adopted a few years ago. And so we don't look alike very much, right? And so that really, for me, on a personal level, is a journey about things related to race that are just asking lots of questions and trying to sort of experience some of that with and through her, right, my little girl, and you see kind of things a little bit differently. So eyes are continuing to open in my home, and certainly across throughout the life of the church as well. So that's really fun. So specifically though, within the trust company, a lot of what we do, and this is not a commercial trust company, but it might be helpful for you to know, big picture, a lot of what we do is frankly simply respond, right? We react to the wishes, right? To the needs, the desires, the preferences, and the plans of Presbyterian churches as it relates to, how and what, right, they'd like to see done with their investments. And right, that covers a wide range, right, of things, right? But more and more, I've been here for almost nine years now. More and more churches are coming to us specifically because of our ability to do what Maggie was describing, which was invest in a way that is reflective of who we are as people of faith, but then also do so in a way that's mindful of things like performance, right? Risk, cost, diversification. You got to add the investment muscle to it as well. And there are ways to do that. And we're very pleased and privileged. It's really good work, things that we get to do in the life of the church. So in the way of responding, right, there are some that have very specific thoughts around these things, others more general in nature. And so one thing that we have been working on for the last few years, as an example, right, the dialogue that's running around fossil fuel-free investment, right, that, so we were asked at the foundation level, we were asked to come up with an investment vehicle to sort of, right, to be able to be used by churches that want to go ahead and have that expressed in their investments. We've done the same thing now in areas related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And you all may know this already. There are certain elements of socially responsible and faith-based investing that are purely about how we don't invest, right? What are we screening out? Sort of the negative elements, right? If you're familiar with that. But then I think more and more what's happening is that folks are becoming more aware of and are looking for and are interested in, not only what we are not doing with our money, but what are we doing with it? So positive aspects. We want to allocate resources toward companies, organizations, groups that are doing really good work as it relates to various social environmental issues. And so just, proxy voting, corporate engagements, shareholder resolutions, things that we have done sort of individually at the foundation or in collaboration, partnership with other denominations and organizations. Just know that, you're talking to a group that's been doing this work for many decades, long before Maggie and I got there. It was very much a part of the fabric, just the culture, the heartbeat of everything that we do at the foundation. So let me just stop for 1 second. Any questions at all about, foundation, trust company, structural things, legal, regulatory, anything at all before we talk about the funds? Okay, well, let me see then.
Actually, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm still a little confused about the structure here. Are you kind of like an employee of the foundation, or did the foundation hire your trust company to maintain all of the foundation investments? I'm a little confused about the structure.
Okay, Maggie, you or me? You may take that one? Or-
I'll go and then you can correct me. So the New Covenant Trust Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Presbyterian Foundation. It has one shareholder, and that is the foundation. So it is an independent private purpose bank, but it is owned by the Presbyterian Foundation, and it was created out of the Presbyterian Foundation for that purpose. Did I mostly get that right, Brad?
Yeah, Maggie, others are really good at telling this whole, 1799 story, which, for the first couple hundred years that the foundation existed, the only thing that you could do was really, create a permanent endowment fund. You had to give money away, right, to create an entity or an account to support mission and ministry. In the mid-1990s, the New Covenant Trust Company was established, officially 1998, by the foundation, specifically then, so again, in response to, right, requests by the denomination, by presbyteries, by churches, and by individuals who said, look, we want the foundation to help us with our assets, but we don't want to give them away, right? They're ours. They belong to us as a local church. We just want good church people who understand and share our values to help us make good investment choices. So that is the work of the New Covenant Trust Company. We provide discretionary investment management services for a fee. So Maggie and I are colleagues. We work together, but technically, David, I am an employee of the New Covenant Trust Company, which again is a subsidiary under the Presbyterian Church Foundation. So a little bit of a unique structure that a public charity would have underneath it or within it, a federally chartered and regulated limited purpose national bank. So I think the Mormon Church is the only other sort of denominational entity that has a trust company. So pretty cool. The Presbyterian Church has what you have. Yes, sir, Mr. Dennis.
So Brad, does the trust company have managed pockets of money that are comparable to mutual funds that churches and individuals can choose to invest in, or at least on the surface, does supposedly the trust company craft every investment for a church specifically just for that church? And it'd be hard for me to believe that you have enough people on board to do that. But how is that part
Okay.
done?
So a typical sort of engagement with a church, hey, we've got X amount of dollars at wherever, or we've just received a large bequest and we need help. It's help us with something here. So there's a very consultative process we'd want to go through there. We talk about sort of the collective risk tolerance. What's the plan? What's the purpose? Socially responsible preferences, liquidity needs, restrictions, designations. Is there an investment policy? Right? There's just a lot that we would dig into with each client that we serve. From an investment standpoint, I'm sure you'll track this, Dennis, and maybe others. You would generally put our trust company, from an investment philosophy standpoint, into the camp of those that prefer to use, indexy kind of things, right? Institutionally priced, no load mutual funds that are either index funds or enhanced index funds. So we're not, big sort of buyers and sellers, active traders, right, in the individual stock and bond markets. So we do use a lot of passively managed mutual funds, identify an appropriate asset allocation for each client, right, which is driven by the information that we gather sort of from and with them. And then from there, we build the portfolio that is specific to them, right? But under the hood, I would say that, there is a lot of consistency, right, in terms of the underlying investments, but with very slight, subtle tweaks that are specific to them. So It's probably somewhere in between the two kind of scenarios that you just described.
Okay, what is the minimum for a church to utilize a trust company as opposed to, say, just using New Covenant mutual funds, or using both for that matter? But what specifically for the trust company, what is the minimum?
Right. So we don't have a stated minimum in terms of a sort of a market value, but we do charge a minimum fee, right? And so that minimum fee kind of informs a minimum balance, right? And that minimum fee is $2,500 a year.
Okay.
1% on the first million. So if you do the math, that basically once we get to 250,000, that's about where that minimum would sort of kick in for a church that would consider the services of the trust company. So we're at about 430 million, depends on the day, right?
Sure.
About 250, 275 church clients, portfolio sizes ranging from that 200, 250,000 up to, I think our largest is around 30 million. But boy, just a lot of local churches between kind of 500,000 and 3 to 4 million. That's where we are. That's where we live.
Okay.
That brings up two more questions. One of them for Maggie, and that is the New Covenant Trust Company the only facility that's handling the foundation funds? And for Brad, if you're investing in index funds, how in the world are you separating companies that might be objectionable as far as a faith or moral aspect of it? Because their mutual funds almost always contain arms companies or rifle companies or whatever. So how do you separate that?
Sure. Maggie, you want to take the first one?
Yeah, I'll respond first. The answer is the assets of the Presbyterian Foundation, which are separate from the New Covenant Trust Company. I mean, I think that we're at about $2+ billion. And I don't have the exact number. Those assets are invested in a variety of different places in different ways because there are different restrictions on the assets of the Presbyterian Foundation. So our endowment funds are invested in a few different places, but those funds do have to be responsive to the social witness requirements of General Assembly, the New Covenant mutual funds are also built to be responsive to that. And then I'm going to step on Brad's toes just a little here and say, not everything that happens at the trust company has to be in response to the social witness requirements. You have the option to build those customizations and to build them in the ways that work for your church when you work with the trust company. So GA has its own set of things that they've decided are the social witness requirements they want to respond to. But GA, General Assembly, has not yet said that we're going to divest from all fossil fuels. However, you can go over to the trust company and say, we want to be in divested investments that don't touch fossil fuels, and they can build you a portfolio that does that. Similarly, you can be, General Assembly can say, we're not going to invest in XYZ company, but you can say, well, I really like XYZ company, and you can go invest in that with the trust company. And now I'll give it back to you, Brad, and hopefully I didn't mess that up.
No, that's totally good. And right on. And so David and for others, so conceptually, I think what we're talking about there, boy, it is really difficult to build an investment portfolio that is ever going to be completely and totally sort of pure, right? Because of just globalization, interconnectedness of companies across sectors and things. So we're going to use these mutual funds that have certain screens attached to them, right? Some have screens Again, at the sort of categorical level, things like alcohol, tobacco, gambling, firearms, pornography, right? So those are some of the types of funds that we're going to look to be using. But for these more sort of focused mandates that are fossil fuel free and then related to diversity, equity, inclusion, those are common stock portfolios, right? But we're building them. We're the ones who are building them, right? But we're building them in a manner that is consistent with that kind of philosophy I described about generally tracking an index of some sort, right? And for the most part, from an investment standpoint, we're talking about either the S&P 500 or the Russell 3000. So we start with that universe and we screen them down, right? To first of all, we start with that sort of PCUSA list, of companies, and then there's a ranking system, a lot of different data sources out there that help us better understand what companies are doing in areas related to energy, right? As well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so then we take sort of a sampling from different sectors. So in effect, what we've done is we've built our own versions of sort of smaller index funds, right? That have that screening attached to them. Big picture, even within the PCUSA and the social witness principles, this is just maybe, I didn't know this when I first started working here, but there's this term that's called revenue banding, right? Revenue banding. And basically what it means is as a company is sort of reviewed, it's analyzed at sort of as measured by how much of its revenue is produced by certain types of activities, right? And even within the PCUSA, I think the revenue band is either 20 or 25%. I think it's 20. Right, so if a certain company has got more than 20% of its revenue generated by something that we don't like, if it's over 20, you're out, right? But if it's under 20, you're still okay, right? So I give you that, I think, hopefully to try to reinforce this idea that we're all making a good faith effort here, right, to minimize as much of the things that we're talking about. But it's possible that there's going to be a little bit of something in there that we don't like, right? Because of this term called revenue band, right? So it's about kind of pegging that threshold and then making decisions from that point on. So there you have it. So what a lot of churches are doing with us, they're coming to us saying, hey, look, by and large, we're a Presbyterian church. We care deeply about faith-based and socially responsible investing. We want to be, broadly diversified. We want something that's low cost. We want you all to manage it for us. And we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So what we're doing as investment professionals is we're pulling in this particular fund or this strategy, right, and incorporating it as a part of a more globally diversified portfolio, right? So we do seek to try and balance as good stewards, right, as fiduciaries. The desire to maintain or achieve a very high level of diversification, minimizing some of that risk that would go along with putting something entirely into sort of one particular space in the market, and then we sort of build around it. So that's how we're seeing a lot of churches begin to sort of work their way into these different types of socially responsible strategies, kind of high level, and then sort of building out individual sleeves that are representative of their specific values. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's just a very active and ongoing conversation. Another thing that we're doing that we think is very interesting, right? We look for those fund partners that are doing some really great work. One of them in particular that we're just now beginning to work with on the sort of the bond side, the fixed income side of a portfolio. They have been about this work since the mid to late 1990s. And in effect, what they're doing is they've identified different themes, right? That are, I'll give you some examples: affordable housing, education and child care, neighborhood revitalization, poverty alleviation, rural community development, things related to sustainable agriculture, minority advancement. There's a lot of different sort of themes that they've identified. And so what we're able to do is, in effect, when we work with them, and I think they've kind of got a band at around $500,000. So if we come into them with an opportunity where we have at least $500,000, they're allowing us to identify, which would then, to use your example, to use you as an example, if First Santa Fe wanted to be a client, we engage them, we would say, okay, we can identify a theme, right? One of these that I've just referenced, I think there's 20 or 30 of them. And then we can identify a state, a county, we could even identify a zip code, right? To look for ways to deploy your funds directly into specific projects that are connected to these themes, right? So in effect, what we're talking about is a church having its own form of what's a positive investment. And it's something that you can sort of touch and feel and point to and say, hey, we as a congregation are supporting this really cool thing that's happening in our zip code, in our county, or in another part of the country where you're doing other good mission projects. You know, those kinds of things are unique. And it's our job as investment professionals to kind of vet them, right? To make sure that they're doing good work in accordance with industry standards and best practices, and that we incorporate them as we see fit. So these are the kinds of things that we would look to bring into those conversations, right? With local churches. We're really refine whatever it is that's on your minds as it relates to particular issues, again, or themes, and then work directly with you to build out a portfolio that's reflective of your values. So I feel like I just said a whole lot. It's, you know, we're trying to keep it not at 30,000 feet coming down to 10,000, you know, and at some point we're glad to sort of further engage. Just wanted to give you a sense of the types of things that we're trying to achieve in a way that's inexpensive, right? That's efficient from an investment standpoint. You know, something we're wrestling with, and we study this all day long. And Miss Judy, give me 1 second, I'll get to you. Is how to quantify, how to measure. You know, it's those benefits, right? What is the value of deploying those assets into some really cool project? It's hard to know, right? That's one of the hard things. When you screen things out and you just manage an investment portfolio, well, it's pretty easy to manage or to measure that investment performance. Gross of fees, net of fees against a benchmark, there it is. We're trying to get to that next level of let's actually add some good stories and some other tangible data points to help folks understand that separate from investment performance, what you're doing in terms of helping make the world become a better place. I don't know, more meaningful ways to measure things than beyond just the numbers. So Miss Judy, yes, ma'am.
Yes, our church has a strong commitment to international mission. Is this an area where you're working?
So let's see. I mean, of course, right? I mean, we manage and steward a lot of funds that are ultimately for the benefit of international missions, right? Most of them, I would say, on the trust company side, right, are managed on behalf of a local church, just like yours. You know, I can tell you that the foundation itself is involved in some of our own positive investments in other parts of the world where we're, you know, taking foundation assets and deploying them into other parts of the country. I hope that answers your question, but yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Esther, hi.
Hi. Could you compare the New Covenant funds with the socially responsible funds in the big companies like Vanguard?
So the New Covenant funds, that's not the trust company, right? Not us.
Okay.
It's close, right? But so I want to make you did mean the New Covenant funds, right?
Well, or your funds that you assemble for churches, either way. I mean,
Sure.
Obviously yours are crafted more specifically, right?
It's a little hard because we use the same name for two different things. And I like to say it's because Presbyterians are very learned and smart. And so we like to challenge everyone. But covenant funds, the family of mutual funds, are built to be responsive to the social witness requirements as set forth by General Assembly. But they're mutual funds that are their own thing outside of what Brad does. So Brad, you can take that.
So, right. So from an investment standpoint, the new covenant funds by prospectus, right, by mandate are required, as Maggie said earlier, to follow the guidance, the decisions of the PCUSA, right? So the Vanguards of the world, other fund families that have socially responsible funds, that's not necessarily a part of how they would be managed, right? What you tend to see there are more kind of categorical screens, right? So kind of a good faith effort. I mean, I can tell you specifically within the trust company, we have the ability to use the Vanguards of the world and the dimensional funds of the world and other types of fund families beyond just the new covenant funds, right? So, it kind of depends on who you're comparing them against, but the new covenant funds are going to be classified also as a pretty passively managed fund complex. Our job, our role, our engagement with the new covenant funds really is to make sure that those proxies are voted properly, right? And to make sure that the day-to-day fund manager, who is SEI, they manage the new covenant fund. The SEI is staying within the parameters of the PCUSA. So I think it just comes down to just a more specific kind of universe of screens that are connected to the new covenant funds than some of the others.
Okay, so it's just basically there's a set of decision-making rules about what to invest in, and those would be different from, I'll call them the general mutual fund universe, and more specific to the Presbyterian Church.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Exactly.
Hey, Dennis.
I think it even gets more complicated. Esther asked about the Vanguard funds. Raymond James has their own socially responsible things and everything. But then the question comes up, well, if that's the case, why would I deal with Vanguard? Because they also have funds that are in tobacco, alcohol, arms, and everything else. Raymond James also has deals in funds with other clients that deal in that. So the question comes up, why should I deal with either of those? So it's not a perfect world. It's not a black and white world. From what Brad is explaining and Maggie's explaining, the best I can understand up to now is that this is specific to the Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian Foundation. And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the new trust covenant is not like Raymond James or Vanguard. They're specific to faith-based communities. Is that correct? Or do you have other clients that, in other words, if I were to find out that the new covenant trust company was dealing with the arms branch of Boeing aircraft, I think I would be disappointed. So I don't know how you separate the two, but I think they are definitely separable.
Gotcha. So yes, in the trust company and the foundation, David and others, we are not all things to all people, right? And I've worked at other places. Some of the names, the private bank at JP Morgan. I worked at TIAA-CREF for a time as well. That we've got everything, right? Whereas here, that we're kind of focused on bringing a sort of a wider range of services, resources, options into a much more kind of narrowed universe of clients, right? Which is the Presbyterian Church USA.
And on a very practical level, I mean, I would say that, all things being equal, and when you look at, and again, I know this is not a commercial for the trust company, but we are talking about dismantling structural racism and how we live out our values every day, right? Our values as Christian people. One of the things that I think is always important, and I've done this with Brad enough times where I'll say to a church, you can compare us to Raymond James, or you can compare us to Vanguard or Fidelity, or whatever private manager you want to look at. And at the end of the day, the results, the returns, the fees, they're going to be about the same. The big difference, one of the big differences, is that we are the church. And so when you invest through the church, you're expressing church values both in your investment, but then in also the fees that are getting paid, because those go back and they support the work that I'm doing, and they support the missional reinvestment that the foundation is doing in a lot of different places. And so it becomes a much more integrated relationship between, again, faith and function that I was talking about before.
And we do serve other faith-based organizations that are not all Presbyterian, right? So that's, honestly, that's kind of fun work for us. Other, I can tell you specifically, I'm not going to give you names here, but there have been 2 or 3 other denominational foundations who have come to us specifically in the New Covenant Trust Company, because they all have a foundation, right? That's fine, nothing new there, but they don't all, as I said earlier, have a trust company or sort of a, an investment management arm that can do other things. They have come to us sort of as brothers and sisters in Christ, right, who understand and speak this universal language that is church, right, and faith. And they've asked us to help them better manage, better steward their funds, their denominational funds. So that's really fun, ecumenical type church work for us. But we do, I'm trying to think, we don't manage any assets that aren't in some way, shape, or form connected to a church, to my knowledge. So I think, David, if Boeing called us and said, help us with our $1 trillion pension fund, I imagine we would respectfully decline.
And
Unless they wanted some kind of a socially responsible mandate as a part of that, then we might try to figure it out. But I don't know.
and so today's conversation so far has been mostly about churches, local churches, and their investment needs. What about individuals?
So yes, right. It does kind of shift, right, a little bit. You got to enter a kind of a different lens there, talking to an individual compared to a church, in a few different ways. But in the New Covenant funds and the trust company, as well as in the foundation, we do steward funds specifically for individuals. By building very similar looking, socially responsible portfolios. I can tell you sometimes there's a little bit of nuance around how some of these things are built as to whether or not an individual can get in. It's more of an institutional kind of a thing. But our normal, planning engagements, estate planning, financial planning, investment management work for individuals, when we're using those mutual funds all day long for individuals. Right, so building a socially responsible portfolio for an individual is certainly an option through us. We're still working on the diversity, equity, and inclusion fund there. We've got to check a couple more boxes to make that accessible to individuals. Right, but many of the other options that we have are already ready for individuals to invest in if you'd prefer. Dennis, can we come back to you? Did you have something?
Yes. Anyone who has not asked a question, we're running out of time. Is there a question you'd like to pose here at the end? Okay. So Brad, I believe you said that the New Covenant mutual funds tend to be passive also. Is that true on the income fund?
It is perhaps a little bit less so on the income fund than on the growth fund.
Okay. All right. And Maggie, would you please get to me Brad's contact information so I can pursue, at least start for the benefit of the church, to get more knowledgeable and understand the process more. We're in a good spot where we do have cash, and if we can just get a meaningful correction, we would like to deploy it.
What are you waiting on, Dennis?
Yeah. Well,
we had one or two this week, didn't we? What?
Yeah, it was that long. Okay. Anybody have anything here? All right, well, we sure want to thank these two individuals for helping us better understand faith-based investing as it applies to the Presbyterian Church and can to us individually. I will look into how we could, how it would work for us as individuals. And if any of you would like the benefit from my learning experience, I will, like Esther, you might be interested. I'll do my best to convey what Brad and Maggie might have to say in that regard. It's time to step up, so let's do it. So thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. I can tell you right here in Santa Fe, it is spring at last without 15 to 25 mile an hour winds. Let's get out there.
Thank you, Maggie and Brad. This is great. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
We're grateful. Thank you all so much.